Welcome back to another episode of the Gaslet Truth. I'm Dr. Tara Lynn here with my co-host, therapist Jen.
Rawr.
Rawr. Oh, she's got the rawr
That just felt
today.
felt good.
It
Rawr.
feels it feels right.
I don't know.
We
I don't know.
well, we thought today we're going to start off a little bit differently because we have been getting a lot of feedback
Yes.
and we wanted to share some of this feedback with you guys
Yes.
because it feels so
It
good
does.
because we know you're listening. So if you're out there quietly listening, it's okay to share your feedback. If you share your feedback and you don't want us to put it on the air, just say, please don't put this on the air. Then that's fine. But we still love to hear from you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Give us your feedback at the Gaslit Truth Podcast at gmail.com. That's probably the easiest way to do it. But anywhere else you listen to it, please give us your feedback.
Yes,
So,
you can go ahead and even if you want to throw a DM, right, and like to us, or
yes.
even in some of the feedback I want to share, it was actually coming specifically from certain episodes that just really resonated with people, and they got on Insta and were like, "Hey, I just need to say this, and you guys need to know this," which is really cool too, because it makes us feel good. So I have a few things I want to go through.
Yes,
One
please.
one of the comments that we actually got. It's been almost a month now since this came through, and it just feels right today to read it. And it was the comment was, there's a little bit of stuff in the background here that I don't need to say because it was just about my birthday, and I said somehow they knew it was my birthday. But anyways, here's what it says, right? I've been listening to self-help podcasts for 3 years now, and I thought your 2 episodes with you and Dr. Terrelyn were great. And I feel like the two of you are great together. I feel you have a good mix of personal insight, letting the listener into your worlds with that personal touch. I am impressed with your professional touch and your production value right out of the gate. They go on to say that they're proud of us for doing this and talking about these things that people don't want to talk about. And then how production on a podcast, it says, cannot be easy, which I'm reading that going, yeah,
Right.
because that's a 2-man show here, and the
Yes.
really technologically challenged one
She's
takes
pointing at
forever.
herself. Yes.
Oh my God, she's
No,
Louise.
it's a learning curve for sure.
Totally
Mhm.
is. And so went on to just give that. And then I don't know, they say, I don't know if I'm going to be quite as engaged in your postpartum episode, which has already come out, but I'm the listeners are going to hear you because it matters. Your openness, you guys are vulnerable, and I can connect with that, which
So
is
good.
pretty cool. Love you guys and respect you for doing it. So that was one of the comments
So good.
for someone that was listening to us on Spotify. So thank you. The other comment we got was, there's 2 more. One is from someone who was listening to us on YouTube, and it was specific to the episode about antidepressants ruining relationships. And they went on to say, I can't believe there's no comments on this. This is 100% my experience, almost word for word.
Word for word.
Which is, to me, is crazy. And I want to say why I feel it's crazy, because when we did that episode, this idea of like antidepressants ruining relationships,
We were
marriages.
scared. We were
I was
scared.
like, I have this experience, right? Like I could talk all about this idea that I have no sex drive and that like Lexapro is ruining my life and it has really impacted my marriage. But I felt siloed in that.
Yes.
And you talked about it and you've got the experience. It is, so we were kind of like, but that for me was actually one of the ones that was a little bit more like difficult. And so that was cool. So
Yes, that
thank
feedback
you
was
for that.
great. Thank you so much.
And then this next one came from our episode on Deprescribe Me.
Yep, through
And
Instagram. So now you guys know you can comment and do it anywhere,
So
right? We'll
this
get
one
it.
came through Instagram, and the person said specifically, oh my gosh, I felt this episode straight to the core. I have been on a high dose of sertraline for years, and I'm terrified of getting off of them.
Yep.
And again, right here, here we are going through it in the shit. And it just that felt really good, even for like, it just gives me even more motivation to just keep doing this, because you guys are out there. We're all going through some of these same exact things. And talk about fear of getting off of a med. Deprescribing is not a word that gets used. Like, it's not used. And so that idea of, guess what? You can get curious about the fact that what you're on, you actually don't have to maybe be on anymore. Get curious about why. Like, it's a scary space. So
but the reason it's important for you guys to comment is because I do feel that people who have had experiences like these commenters, their voices are drowned out, which is exactly why we're doing this podcast. Like the voice of medication is drowning out the actual research and actual lived experience of so many people. So
Yeah.
this is why we do this. We do it for you. We do it for the voices. We do it for the advocacy. We do it for all of that. And we just want to say thank you for commenting. It means a lot to us and gives us motivation to keep going.
And it takes a very vulnerable person to comment and put that
It
out in front of
does.
everybody. And
It
so
does.
that is that especially when you're not tagging, you're starting it. So be the start. It's the start that stops most people. I don't know, but Dr. Terry may have said that to me in the past.
May or may not. I may have
May
not
or may
said that
not.
to so many people, including myself, all the time. But let's hit this
All
one.
right, what are we talking about? What are we talking about
So
today?
we're gonna. This is a big word. It's a big word, and I'm not sure that many people know this word or even know what it means. It's iatrogenic.
Iatrogenic, and I will confess. I I've heard of this word before. All right.
Confession number 2. I had no idea what the hell it was. Like,
yeah. So in here, what's very interesting too is I've heard of this word. I haven't put it in things, and I we're gonna get to an article that I actually wrote that's about this, but I never put that word in it because it wasn't something that's in my like vernacular that comes out every day. Like I call this other things. There's actually a word.
there's actually a word
on it.
But I also think in psychology, we don't use this word very much as a therapist. We don't. We should a lot. And I think that's also ego driven, often, not always, but often. But I'm just going to read you what it is. Okay, so this is the reading. So this is the dramatic reading that I'm going to do. Not
Use
really.
your drama voice, please.
I'm going to use my drama voice. In mental health care, iatrogenic refers to conditions or effects that are inadvertently caused by medical treatment or healthcare providers. So we've got the treatment and the provider here. This can include unintended side effects of medications. I'm going to add in there, or known side effects that you don't know about, complications from procedures. I'm just sorry.
Don't giggle. You're using your drama voice. There's no giggling with the drama
Or
voice.
worsening of symptoms due to therapeutic interventions. In the context of mental health, iatrogenic effects can include things like medication side effects, misdiagnosis leading to inappropriate treatment, or the exacerbation of symptoms due to certain therapeutic approaches. I'm going to add in there, or treating someone who doesn't need treatment.
Oh boy.
Whether that is medication or even a therapeutic intervention. Specific. Yes. Dun-dun-dun. There we go. Iatrogenic. This one is really uncomfortable.
Yeah, very actually. And I have I put myself, like one of the things that I really hope people who are providers in any way, shape, or form in the mental health field, right? I don't care if you're an MD, you're a psychiatrist, you're a counselor, you're a social worker. I don't care what it is, right? A psychologist. I want you to really think about this episode and like take it to the core a little bit and just actually, I don't know, be honest with yourself on this because it's a hard space to be in, but there's so much truth that comes from this idea that you or your interventions may be making your patients worse.
Sick. Or sick in the first place.
Yes. And that is, and we're going to get to talking about the prison system today. This is going to be brought into this because, and I could tie it in right away. We're going to come back to it, but the way in which psychiatric and mental health interventions, diagnoses are delved out. Okay. Is not individualized. And it is not as systematic as we would in holistic. That's a better word. It's not as holistic and person-centered and individualized as you would want it to be.
Right.
And some of it's fudged for other reasons too. So
that's our new buzzword, fudged. Fudged. It's so clinical. I like that word.
Fudge, call the judge. My mother used to say it to me a little. I don't know what it means. I have no idea. just came to me. Okay. So
And that reminds me of Lila, call the guy. I don't know. I just
I
made that
like,
one up.
yeah, I
Yeah.
know. Good. Hey, listen, we're on it today. We're on it today.
Fudge, call the judge.
Call the judge. I don't know. Okay. So where should we go with this? Where
Well,
should we
there
go
are
with this,
so many
Terry?
places to begin with this. And maybe it's so hard because it hits on so many levels here. And I had done a little delve into some research that I found several months ago on DBT. And if you guys don't know what DBT is, it's dialectical behavioral therapy, and it's one of the evidence-based practices for borderline personality disorder and some addictions and things like that.
Major
And
depression. Yep.
this yes, so the study, I'm sure it's research for more things, but the study that I found was very interesting because they did DBT. So DBT has a lot of moving parts if it's actually DBT. Okay, so again, we use DBT as a okay, it's got coping skills, it has a group therapy, individual therapy, and a treatment team approach. So
Mhm. Coaching, yeah.
individual coaches, whatever,
Mhm.
too, are
Yep.
supposed to be in there.
Yep.
A lot of moving parts. Okay. Most facilities don't have the resources for all those moving parts. So
Mm-mm.
they say they do DBT, but they don't really do full DBT. So with that
Right.
being said, I'm not really sure if this research article, if they actually did. I would assume that they actually did a full DBT thing
Program with all
right,
the
because
modes.
otherwise you couldn't
All the
call it
modes. Yep.
DBT in
It
research, right?
right.
Okay. So anyway, in this article, it was about doing DBT for teenagers and how it made them worse.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, because you're giving it was a universal program for all teenagers in these high schools. Universally, they were doing some, which makes me also believe that they couldn't have really done the full DBT if it was a that's just too many people.
No,
Like,
I'm
there's no way.
guessing it was like the skill sets, right? So you're learning
Probably.
all of the DBT
And
skills
maybe a
and
group, like,
yep.
a
Yep.
class
Yep.
or something,
In
whatever.
DBT,
Yes.
there's specific skills that you're gonna teach people, right? That
Yes.
that focus on some core areas, of mindfulness and functioning interpersonally
Mhm.
appropriate with people, right? Things like that. So
Yes.
I'm guessing it was a skills based where they were
Yeah,
just
that's what I was
talking
guessing
about
too.
skills. Yeah.
Right. But anyway, so the outcomes were that it made them worse. It made their relationships worse with their parents, right?
Wow.
And it made relationships worse at school. So it worsened a lot of things for these teenagers. And I was just bringing this forward as the idea of, like, we cannot give universal interventions when people don't need them. Like,
Mhm.
interventions are meant for people who are in need of the intervention, right? And also I got to thinking about, teenagers, and they're very volatile with their emotions and, dysregulated and all that stuff. So the
Yeah.
interesting part was on my TikTok, it was the commenters like, "Well, what harm is it to give teenagers coping skills?" I'm like, well, because we don't always need to be taught everything, like, this is exactly how you need
Mhm.
to cope. This is exactly what you need to do. Sometimes the strategies of coping with emotions in life comes through lived experience. Like, how did that turn out for you when you did that? Like, not everybody's coping skill is going to be to hurt themselves or end their life, right? Like, sometimes it's just my coping strategy would be to turn to a friend and have a talk. Like, no, I'm good, right? Like,
Yeah. Well,
but instead go ahead.
yes, we put an intervention on a problem that was not there either,
That's not a
right?
problem.
So
Yeah,
this program itself is heavily researched for individuals who have borderline personality disorder.
which is
One of
extreme, like, it's an
extreme,
extreme.
it's
Mhm.
extreme, and
Yep.
for people who maybe don't know too much about that, these are individuals that their emotions are so significantly labile. And when I say that, I mean, you imagine the highest day you can have and the lowest day you can have and everything in between. Okay. On those high days, okay, you want the world there with you and you need people. And on the low days, you're gonna say fuck you, and I'm gonna go in a corner and I'm gonna try to end my life or hurt myself. These people
Right.
are self-mutilating. Okay. They're functioning with people just to even have appropriate boundaries within conversations is something that is very difficult, right? They don't even know how to like sometimes make a request of people because
Right.
they're so emotionally like there's so emotional turmoil, so much turmoil, right?
Right.
They push people away volitionally, and then try to bring people back in because you can't live without them. And so there's so much to this. So we're taking that and putting these
Mhm.
specific skills that are identified for this type of an individual
Mhm.
on teenagers in a school that are
Yes.
researched to work for people who have these extreme cases, right?
Yep.
Where to yeah. So you're putting a blanket intervention on a bunch of people, a bunch of kids that maybe don't even need those skills because they don't have issues with awareness. They don't have
Right.
issues with functioning interpersonally. They don't have issues with
Yes.
their emotions being labile. They don't have those issues in the first place.
Right, and I'm looking at the research article or the summary of the article right now,
Yeah.
and, it also exacerbated depression, which is
Just
so
gonna say that.
interesting, yes,
Yep.
and so this
Yeah.
whole thing of, well, I'm gonna be kinda crass and obnoxious here. We need to save our teenagers from their emotions. Like,
Yep.
we need to save everybody from their emotions, or sometimes we just need to allow them to have and to problem solve their own emotions
Yep.
without an intervention.
Yes.
And to me, that's like helicopter mental health. Like, we need to
Yes.
any emotion needs an intervention, attached. That is just simply not the
Yes.
truth. And doing so can make people worse. And it's interesting because they point out in here I don't know if you remember the school program called DARE,
Oh,
you know?
sure. Drug abuse resistance education.
Yeah,
Dare
actually
to
didn't
keep a
work.
kid off drugs. Dare to keep a
Yeah.
kid
Well,
off
okay,
dope.
so it says
That
DARE,
right?
which from the
Yeah.
90s to early 2000s
Yeah.
taught legions of elementary school children 10 different street names for heroin.
I was there.
Similarly,
I got that training.
it had little to show for its efforts. The curriculum has since been revamped. They're still doing it. It's
Yeah.
different. The self-esteem boosting craze of the 80s didn't amount to much. And yeah, anti-bullying programs actually increase bullying. And so this reminds me of, social media. Does all this information on social media, does it increase mental health problems?
Mhm.
Does all this, and people are going to be so mad I said this. Does all this information about suicidality in our kids, does it play a role when we're talking about it so much, that
Yeah.
now it becomes an option? I don't know the answer to these
Mhm.
questions. I mean, I think there's research that says it doesn't, but I don't know. When you think about
Right.
this, you give
Right.
all the information and it makes things worse. I don't know. I don't
Well, think
know.
it Terry, let's take this at a very simplistic level for people that are
Let's
listening.
do it.
Maybe it's easier to go smaller, or like I should actually say smaller, a broader with the idea. Think about this. I have I have no issues with drug use. Okay.
Mhm.
I have no issues with self-esteem.
Mhm.
I feel pretty damn good as a kid. I've got some good boundaries. My moral compass is developing itself in a way that feels pretty damn comfortable.
Mhm.
Okay. And I am going to sit and be taught interventions that teach you otherwise. So the strong, has really great awareness kid, right? Who is actually doing good, right?
Developmentally,
Yeah.
like, in
Yes.
their
Yes.
developmental zone,
That's a
right? Like,
whole other piece to it, right? Like, I'm
yes.
doing really good. I actually feel good. I've got some good skills. I've got a good self-esteem, good shoulder, good head on my
Mhm.
shoulders, right?
Yes, yes.
I'm gonna sit in groups or whatever, however this was laid out, and be given skills every day that teach me that the way I was doing things needs to be
Is
done
wrong.
differently. Yeah,
Right.
gotta be done different. So that great self-esteem boost that you have and feeling good,
Mhm.
I'm gonna put you in a place where you actually aren't going to feel more empowered, but you're gonna actually feel a little bit more helpless because I'm putting an intervention on you that I actually didn't need in the first place.
Right. I did get
So
it wrong. It was only 1,000 teenagers,
oh,
okay? It was
okay. All right.
1,000 kids, it wasn't the
Right.
whole school, so it was
Yeah.
1,000 kids, but yes,
But I remember
100%.
that. That's like, so you
Yep.
mix scared straight, which DARE was a ton of scared straight, right? Like
Mhm.
we had people coming in through the DARE program that were individuals that had gone through very significant drug histories. And I remember sitting in 8th grade in a whole platform, and there's 3 people, and the speaker was a guy who had killed 2 people because
What?
he had gotten in a vehicle
Oh.
and he had already served his prison time. Okay, he had gotten in a vehicle under the influence of heroin and
Mhm.
he killed somebody. And
Oh,
so
that's
here
like
he is.
when they assign, inmates victim impact.
Yes, yes, victim impact
Yes.
ex speakers. Yes. Now,
Yeah.
back in the the late '80s, which was when this was happening, right? I remember this being paired with the Dare program.
Mhm.
I remember being in 8th grade, sitting there watching this, going, "My God, am I gonna have a drug problem?"
Oh.
Like, I remember sitting there thinking there was another one who had injured somebody from alcohol, right? And they're coming in and they're bringing these interventions and Dare comes in, the speakers come in. We get my dad had the little, my child graduated Dare on the license plate thing, right? Because I did the whole program. And I remember going out of that thinking like, God, I wonder if I'm going to have a problem with drugs or alcohol. Because I just learned all this stuff that I just
Oh,
never even knew about. I wonder is this going to happen? Like, so there's that piece of it as well. So when we think about the skills that are taught in the DBT program, we teach people
mhm,
how to be more aware of themselves, right? And these are people who truly struggle with being mindful, do
mhm,
not have that full awareness. People who really struggle with relationships, like interpersonally, right?
mhm,
People who are greatly struggling with their emotions and how to
mhm.
manage them, right? So you're sitting there as a kid being taught that how you're doing it obviously is not right and you lose
Well, you're
power.
being taught how to do it for an emotionally dysregulated adult with
Mm.
mental health. Like, this is
Now it
a
was those studies were done. DBT was also done in teens as well. So there's a good chunk of
mm,
research that goes into that population too. There also is a bunch of research that goes into how to take DBT and to take it as a just as sole intervention and to be able to offer that intervention. Can't call it DBT, right? But you could take one of
right,
these modes, right? You can take
right.
one of these modes and you can do that. So
Just offer
because
that.
however, you have to be careful with who you give it. You still have to identify the people that might
Well,
need that mode.
this is the question that I'm not gonna dig into it right now on this podcast. How did they select those 1,000 kids? And was it 1,000 kids that needed it, or was it 1,000 type A kids that got good grades like you and now
Mm,
are suddenly like, "Well, I guess I'm wrong.
yeah,
Like, how I've been
yeah.
handling myself is wrong."
Clearly,
So
how I
then I
manage my
still
emotions
wrong.
isn't right. I'm going to try this new skill that I didn't need in the first
Right.
place.
This goes back to I digressing a little bit. Why are we so goddamn scared of having a kid who has emotions? Like,
Oh,
why are we
yeah,
so afraid of emotions
yeah.
that every emotion needs to be regulated, managed, or changed, or coped with? Like,
Mhm, mhm,
a high schooler, often they cope with it with their friends,
yep,
like just talking it out with their friends, or
mhm.
I don't know, or just move on to the next thing because they're easy to, get rid of it and store it away and move on. I don't know. Like,
I
yeah.
you know what? And you know those things when you always just give the clause and you're like, I'm going to say this and someone's going to get pissed, right? I used to say that to my adult clients that were in DBT with me that would mutilate themselves.
Hmm.
And I would say that to them all the time. And I said, why is it that why do people have such an issue with that? I said, I'm trying to understand that because your world shames you for that. Something's wrong with you. You need a program. You're not doing well. You're hiding your arms, you're hiding your sleeves, you're in your we remove in a prison every single thing that you could possibly hurt yourself with. We're going to sterilize your whole world. We think it's such a huge problem. When in fact, if we would approach it, like I would say this to my clients and they look at me like no, and it's a flip. It's a flip of the way of the view. But I
Hmm.
would say, why does everybody have such a problem with this? I mean, I can
It's not,
understand.
it's not,
Yeah,
yeah.
like,
I mean, if
what
I
why?
to be
Like,
honest, that's the way you wanna live your life, and that's how you're coping with things, like, why is that different than, coping with alcohol or something like that?
correct, because
Personality
that's
coping,
exactly what I'd say to them.
but this is,
Here's Jane Doe with her other addictions. I have a
right,
gambling addiction. I have a shopping addiction. I
right.
can't manage my emotions, so I use other forms of drugs, right? Like,
Mhm,
this one outwardly does some of those same it releases some of those same
mhm.
areas of the brain
It's just
when I
shocking.
Yes, and so here's the deal. So we would bring too much ethics into this and that what's right or wrong,
Mhm.
my job is to save you. My
Right.
job is to keep you from cutting yourself. But is it or is it more of my job to try to normalize what's happening to you and try to help you get through to find different interventions for yourself, different skills that
Right.
you want to do that might be more effective
Right.
than taking, a knife and hurting yourself with it. And they'd look at me like, I don't think I've ever heard someone say that before. And I would say, I don't understand what the big, huge issue is. And it was like, and people would be pissed to hear that, right? Because that's wrong.
Well, so
I,
let's
I
let's
you know,
let's get
let's
back
let's go into
to
that.
yes.
Let's go into
So
this.
so the idea that when we apply an intervention, if it's to the wrong crowd,
Yep.
the wrong person, or the person doesn't need it or want it, by the way, because
Mhm.
if you don't want something, that can cause harm later if you're forced to do something,
Mhm.
right?
Correct.
And this goes into, CBT is another one. So again, trauma. So there's another article I'll just kind of share with you. Trauma survivors speak out against. Oh, this is a DBT one
TBT.
again. Yeah. Um, it's the same stuff.
Mhm.
But it's also saying, it's a horrible experience. Because it doesn't really. Uh, it doesn't really get to why or helping you with your PTSD the way that it should. It's to me, the early stages of DBT, particularly because what I recall of it, and it's been a long time, is that it got you prepared for trauma treatment, right? That's
Yes.
how we used to do it. It would prepare you
Yes.
for EMDR or something like
You'd have
that.
the skill
Give
sets
you
to
the
be
coping
ready to
skills.
to
Yes.
manage the emotions that we take this
Mhm.
tiered process, right? First you do this, then you do this, then you're ready for
Right.
the more evasive interventions, which goes
Yes.
back to all these assumptions of the idea that why couldn't the client just be ready overall,
Mhm.
to do
Yep.
EMDR in the first place? Like,
Mhm.
what were we so afraid of, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So actually, part of this article is interesting because it's talking more about um consumers who went to a therapist who then for PTSD, who then decided that they needed DBT and terminated the relationship that they had with the original therapist so they could go get DBT.
Mhm.
And so I'm sure there's more to this article, but this is just the base of it because that's what the experiences are. My therapist decided that I needed DBT even though I have PTSD, shipped me off to DBT. How does that make a person feel,
Mhm.
when the therapist is saying, I know what the therapist is saying, "This is outside of my scope," or "You need something different." Like, I understand that, but
Possibly. Yes.
right, possibly, but
Yes.
the message is what?
Yeah.
You are unhelpable here, you
Yeah.
know? You are so terribly off that you need a higher level of care. There's a lot of messaging
Mhm.
around how we make those referrals,
Yeah, we have to be
I
careful
think.
with that.
We
Those
have to be very
words
careful,
those words really
which in
matter,
and of
which
itself
lots of
can.
power.
Yeah,
Ooh, do we have
lots of
power?
power in and of itself is iatrogenic, right?
There
Like
you go. That's
mhm,
exactly what it is. Yeah.
yes.
Yep,
So
that's
there was actually a girl
exactly what
on
it is.
TikTok, and she did a TikTok on, basically her therapist fired her. Okay, this was
Mhm,
the whole thing. Her therapist fired her,
mhm.
and I didn't comment on it, but I'll bring it up because it's public. And she said her therapist fired her because she did a safety contract with the therapist, which we all know Safety contracts are done for liability if you guys don't know this. It's not
Yeah,
necessarily done for your safety, it's a liability issue.
it is.
Right, so it's convoluted and designed to protect the therapist rather than the client, in my humble opinion,
Mm,
which
mhm,
whatever. You're like, "Hmm."
mhm.
Anyway, so she signed 5.5 years ago, she signed a safety contract with her therapist that stated in there that if she attempted to take her own life, that their therapeutic relationship would terminate. And I believe probably, I'm guessing, terminate for a higher level of care because
Yeah.
again, in our if you are going to be if you're going to have that amount of suicidal thinking or whatever, like in private practice or like the kind of practice that Jen and I have, you might not be well suited for us yet. You might need a different level of care, somebody that has more resources, can
Mhm.
resource you
Right,
differently, whatever.
right.
So I understand that premise of it,
Mhm.
but apparently, according to this consumer, it was just cut off. Like, yep, because she ended up trying to take her own life after 5.5 years, and the relationship was cut off. Now, there's a lot of things to think about here, but the one thing I'm thinking about is the damage that caused.
Mhm.
So severing off that relationship could fall under iatrogenic, making something
Yes.
worse. So this was
Yes.
the intervention. What the intervention was a safety plan. And if you violated your safety plan, the intervention was, we are done. That's the intervention. That was the intervention, you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm.
And so it happened. They are done. That caused harm.
Yes.
And frankly, I don't know, unless I'm sure there's more to it or something different, but I don't know how you could do that. It would be the intervention would be, I would resource you to someplace else. Like
Right. And
that would be,
maybe that was
it
part of
could
it,
have
right?
been part of it. I don't know. This is a
Yeah.
smidge of a story,
Sure. Sure.
but
But
I,
it's
I
still the
look at,
truth, right?
well,
It's
that
what
there,
you what
the
you put out
ending
was
of
the
a
truth.
therapeutic
Yeah.
relationship can cause harm, especially when it's
Yes.
an abrupt ending, which is one of the
Yes.
ethical things that is talked about. Like
Mhm.
to
Yes.
not just terminate like that, unless
Yes.
like I'm in the hospital or something,
Mhm.
and I can't
Yeah.
care for you. But
Yep.
there is that, and so there's also getting back into like CBT. It's the same stuff. Marginalized populations in CBT.
Yep.
They talk about how harmful that is because it is not made for all populations.
Mhm.
So we have to be careful. And I think about that study, and in the prison, who are we working with all the time? The marginalized populations.
100%. The
Yeah.
the most marginalized
The
populations.
most marginalized
Mhm.
population.
Mhm.
And here we are by the book doing DBT and CBT by the book because liability,
Mhm.
right? We have
You have
to
to.
keep doing the same thing over and over
Mhm.
and over again because that's the research protocol,
Yes.
in order to prove that something works, right? So
Yes.
we perpetuated some of this iatrogenic care
We did.
on many, many levels.
I
Okay.
I can own one of them all day long, and I'm gonna own it right here. The idea of, 2 ideas. 1, misdiagnosing,
Yes.
okay?
Mhm.
For
Yeah, oh,
myself.
I'm not
Yeah.
just gonna say misdiagnosing, I'm gonna say having to diagnose.
Having to diagnose. Yes.
Yeah.
And so that is something too that I address it in a very different way now with my patients that I have in private
Mhm.
practice now versus the way I addressed it in the prison system. So there's 2 things. It's the diagnostic piece one, and then the other piece is I would get caught up, especially with my DBT clients, okay,
Mhm.
and how great it felt to know that I was saving them. Uh-huh, and I'm gonna say it that way because, it kinda ties into this article that I wrote about, this idea that, I think very critically about this now and in a whole different way than I ever did before.
Mhm.
But those clients I had in DBT, and even some of my clients that were in the AODA programming, right, that I did, it felt good when they had the small wins. So good that I would hit spaces where I went, "You know what? They rely on me. They need me. They need me." And that's when I started taking shit home with me at night, and I couldn't when I say take it home, it was in my
In your
brain,
brain.
right? I'm looking things up, I'm reading, I'm doing all of this work because, which is where burnout comes from.
Mhm.
It definitely what burnout is when you try to not try to, help somebody and offer skills, but you take on their suffering as though you are the reason that it gets better. That whole piece, but I did that, and so I perpetuated things as well. And that's a tough thing because you got to step back from that and look at it. And that's why I was hoping people that are listening to this episode that are clinicians or in this field, right? Like, are you making your clients worse?
Worse.
And so I can talk about, and I know the interventions I put on some people, right? Were not the best ones for them, but
Mhm.
I did what I felt was right at the time. And when I look back now, it's like all the AODA things that were delved out, the CBT interventions that were delved out to people, you know, I don't know if you needed them, but I put that label on you because
Mhm.
of what I knew at the time and
Mhm.
because of my environment. And because of this idea that if you don't complete these interventions that were assigned to you, that's really going to screw you over too.
Mhm.
in the
Well,
long run.
so much so
Yeah.
where Jen and I worked together, was a very specialized place. And
Yeah.
it was specialized in the fact that I used to call it the tune-up shop,
Hmm.
so they would send inmates from other prisons to this particular place, and these were the most mentally ill or most behaviorally challenged, I would say,
Yep.
folks in prison, men
Mhm.
particularly. And
Mhm.
so they would stay there longer and longer and longer. It was really designed for more of a short-term stay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of systems in place that wouldn't allow them to go back more timely. That was
Mhm.
part of it, but also they would a lot of inmates would when they knew that they were getting ready to go back to the prison that they came from,
Yep.
they would then exhibit these extraordinary behaviors again,
Mhm. Yes.
self-injurious or whatever it was, and then they got to stay again.
Mhm.
They got to stay for longer. Now we had to resource them more. And it was just interesting because this conversation kind of was inspired by a podcast we listened to. And the guy was literally talking about in an inpatient setting. There was a consumer who had been there like for 4 years or something. It was a
Mhm.
extraordinarily long amount of time because every time they tried to treatment plan her out, she would be
Straight up just backed
injurious
out.
or
Yep.
suicidal
They
or
gotta keep
she
her.
yeah, so
She
they
can't
had to
go back
keep
on the
her.
streets. She can't go
Exactly.
into the
So they
community, like,
had
yep.
to keep her,
Yep.
and so he had sat her down and said, "Listen, what what we're doing here is making you sick. We are the
Mhm.
problem." And I was like,
Yes.
"Holy crap. If I would have just said that to some of these people, like, you know who's the problem here? It's not you, it's me.
Mhm.
I'm the
Yes.
problem here because I keep saying, "Oh, you need more
Yeah.
care. You need more. You need more. You need more." And so there was a supervisor that I worked with, and shout out to him, because he would say that all the time. He's like, "We are making them sick," and
Mhm.
I know psych services would argue back, "No, we're not." And I'm like, now taking like all these years later, I'm like, he was right. Well, I knew on some respects he was right at the time. Like there was a lot of being correct in that statement, but I
Yeah.
didn't realize how right he was until literally right now, and I've been out of it for a
Mhm.
long time, but,
Yeah.
and I also think about there was, some inmates and I'm sure that these guys still exist and keep coming in, who don't do well in society because they've been so institutionalized for so long, so
Yes.
they recommit, they reoffend, once they're released, they reoffend to go back in, right?
And
And
I
so
that is very real, and what you're talking about,
Mhm.
Terry, is not a, like, made up phenomenon or a, and 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 I can say that, working at both the male and female intake facilities,
Yes.
for many, 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 many years. So
Mhm.
I saw this dynamic happen. And I
Mhm.
watched it happen, and the closer I got to people and I learned more about their stories when they would come back again, many times that story included the safeties of and the simplicities of our environments because we did protect them, but we perpetuated the inability for them to learn how to fucking adult.
Right.
I mean, we did every single day, and it was so hard because they'd come back in. I remember guys talking to me, and I'd be like, "You just released 38 days ago,"
Right.
and it come right back through intake. I do all the bells and whistles because I did their intake a month and a half ago, and
Yep.
they would be honest, and some of them would just tell me, "Listen, this is so safe for me. You have
Yeah.
no idea." And so they would share these stories for me, and my needs are met. I have everything met here. And
Yep.
when you stay
There
in
are
a
really no demands on me.
there are not. And when you stay in a prison long enough, as an inmate that lives there, you become you like on the outside lens of this, people are like, oh my God, it would be so terrible. There's no way I could ever live in a prison, right? And I'm not saying that they're beautiful and wonderful and fabulous,
I
but
think
for
it depends upon
people,
the state you're in, the prison you're in too, but
that's very
anyway.
true. That's very true.
Yeah.
And we work in a
We had a
state where
good state, yeah.
we actually have a fairly decent prison
Mhm.
systems in our state versus others. But they would say this to me and they're like, Everything is it's done for me." And
Mhm.
so the I don't have to make those decisions. I know the care I need is there, and people in here actually care for me more than people that are on the
Yep.
outside, right? So we perpetuate, here comes this iatrogenic idea of perpetuating helplessness in people
Mhm.
And that's okay for them, right? And so it makes sense to me. We had people that would try to compromise their release. They
Yes.
would compromise everything they could do to release from prison, and we're spending resources up the ass to try to keep them, one, safe, two, making sure to get them out of the prison, to the parole officer, right, to get them
Mhm.
where they've got to go. um it was just unbelievable because they'd call a bluff right before they'd leave because they
Yep.
were so, it felt good to be in the system that they were
Mhm.
in. um
But, I mean, you can say that some welfare systems perpetuate iatrogenic,
Absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely.
things,
But
so
yeah, so that was a very big thing. So the supervisor that you had, which was also somebody that I worked with too, his statement is very, very real.
Mhm.
And it brings me back to this idea of clinicians, okay, delving out interventions, which I know I have done. Okay. And I will be the first to call myself on this until I got a better level of understanding and curiosity about this,
Mhm.
of this idea that therapy can harm our clients. Okay.
Mhm.
And so there's a magazine that a publication I write for. I gotta give a shout out on this to Miss Bernadine
She's
Otto.
holding it up if you're
I'm
on YouTube,
holding it
go see
up
it,
right
yep.
now. You can
Beautiful
see it.
magazine,
Oh my
yep.
god, see that? That's me on the front. That's me. See how good I look? See how perfect I look? Okay, anyways, it's called Live, Love, and Eat. And the magazine is about health and well-being and nutrition. And I got to give a shout out to it because it's
Mhm.
it's the editor of this magazine really lets me be free with what I write about and is open to these alternative ideas for things, right?
Right.
So that I have to say that. So I wrote an article that's going to be published in that magazine about pondering this idea in my career of what type of profound trust our clients put in us. Okay.
Mhm.
And how much power as a medical doctor, psychiatrist, psychologist, NP, psychotherapist, like prescriber, whatever you want to call it, all of our helping profession, okay, that we are in, people put so much stock in us. Our words mean so much, right?
Oh,
And so people come through these doors talking to us,
yes.
and we diagnose them with labels, we put treatment interventions on them,
Mhm.
and they stay with it. And sometimes we don't pay attention to why they're staying with it for so long, nor do we pay attention to how much they start to need us or need the intervention.
Right.
And they put so much stock into what could really be a sobering truth for me, which is not all helping professions. And I talk about therapists in my article, fully grasp this of our influence on our clients, or perhaps some of them do, and we don't
I didn't
acknowledge it.
I'm just gonna say this, I didn't really realize it until I went into private practice full time, like 10 years
Same.
ago, 10, 12 years ago.
That's yep.
When I have clients say, like, "I hear your voice on my shoulder or in the back of
Yes,
my
it's
mind,"
in my
or things
article.
like
I
that,
wrote
yes, like,
that.
yeah, and then I'm like, "Holy crap,
Yes.
my words are really important, like,
They
really
are, and
important."
there's so much stock people put in that, right? So,
Mhm,
you've got a therapist you've been seeing for years. You've
mhm,
done, I mean, and it doesn't even have to be years, it could be actually very short time, okay?
mhm,
People are in their most vulnerable state, putting all of their trust in you, and that weekly session that you have, it's just like this beacon of solace in their life, right? It is
mhm.
just like, and they can come, they can layer it out. Clients go home, they tell their family, they tell their friends, they tell their kids, like, this therapist is fantastic. Your therapist is by your side during the darkest freaking moments you've ever been through. And in this article, I literally write, you can hear your therapist challenging you, right? You can
Yeah,
hear him in your ear going, okay, now wait, pause, identify your emotions, right?
right.
Take a breath. You got this, right? It's like the little person on your shoulder, and you can hear
Yes,
him in your ears. Okay. That is powerful. We are fucking
very,
powerful in that. Okay. And
very.
so she just gets me. I've had people say, Jen, you just get me. Okay. So
Mhm,
then I want people to consider this truth when it comes to diagnosing, giving treatment programs to people that might be delved out in a blanket fashion where we don't take enough time to slow down, take a more holistic intervention, right? A client's success in therapy is only as good as the self awareness and the biases and the conflicts of interest that your therapist may possess, as well as those that the client has. And so, if a therapist is not paying mind to a position of the power that they have, okay, and they just delve out these interventions or keep a client sick, okay, I'm
mhm.
going to tell you that there are benefits. People are not going to want to hear this. For a therapist to keep a client sick, for a system to keep a client sick, they benefit from that. The
Well,
longer
can
that,
I just say something
yeah,
too? Because,
yeah,
I think about this in the addiction community
yes,
particularly,
mhm,
because the rewashing of clients in and out of addiction treatment is a
yes,
huge problem,
mhm,
and they do it for, insurance purposes. There are some addiction centers that, will actually make a client reuse again so that they can
mhm,
come back in again,
mhm,
So,
yeah, yeah. So that's
reintroduce using, you know what I
yes,
mean? Like, so
yes,
that's a whole different episode. I'd love to have somebody on here talking about that.
yeah,
But yes, and I also wanna say, I don't think, because I know what you're gonna say, like, you keep them in longer and so you can bill longer and you have all those things, and those are biases and problems, they certainly are.
mhm,
I
mhm,
would like to talk about the therapist who doesn't necessarily do that,
'kay,
but they also don't know that they're causing harm in such a way that they're not challenging or setting
yes,
goals. Like, because you can be in therapy for a long time and still make progress, or you can be in
yes,
therapy for a long time and go downhill,
yes, mhm,
So, because
absolutely, because
the
that's
therapist bystander, I
yes,
think, is the thing, like, the one who's just like, the therapist who believes that you can't. And there's that, commercial that
mhm,
I sent Jen. It was for National Down Syndrome Day, and I think it's very powerful for
mhm, it is,
so many marginalized clients, um, in the idea of, if you think I can't, then I can't,
and I won't, and I
then
can't.
I
Yep,
won't
mhm,
because I
yep,
can't. But if
yep,
you think that I can, then at least I'll have the option to do it. Then I might.
yes,
If you think I can,
yep,
then I might,
yes,
And
yes,
this goes into the mental health therapy practice too, because if you are a therapist and you only view your clients as not being capable,
mhm, broken, mhm, yep,
broken, all those
can't do it,
things,
mhm,
yeah, then that's what they're gonna be. It's like a
yes,
parent who thinks about that with a
yes,
child,
yes,
Like, if you view your child who has maybe some problems to overcome as they can't, then I'm gonna tell you
mhm,
100% they won't, because
mhm,
they don't believe they even have the
yes,
option. And
mhm,
so in therapy, if your clients, because of you, of what you're doing, don't believe they even have the option of getting better, that is a problem, and
yeah,
that is
mhm.
iatrogenic,
It
And
it absolutely is. So are we keeping them sick, right?
Mhm,
Rather than helping them. And so this idea of dependency can
mhm,
create, can create itself, right? And there's this I'm reliable on this person, right? And
yep,
the hard truth is that there are times where, and I'm not saying all therapists do this, right? I am a therapist and I wrote a very bold article on this, right? But it's about getting people to just view this from just take a second to view it from
yes,
another lens, right? But like
mhm,
a therapist or a system can stand to gain things when the patients don't get better.
better,
Okay? Yeah,
mhm,
they do. And so there are all kinds of things. There's financial incentives, right? There's internal motivation. Like what I said, it
mhm,
feels good. There is an ego boost when I know I'm saving you over and over and over. And if I don't put that shit in check, I might not actually be helping you through this intervention
right,
in the way that I could, right? Like there is a sense of status in a community that we work in that has been that way forever, right? There's this that becomes a thing for people. Colleagues start to boast about this idea to other colleagues when really it's not a good thing that you are this
no,
person, you are helping them, but they're so reliable on you, right? Like we have
right,
contractual obligations that we have to meet even with insurance companies, within private practices, right?
mhm,
That can keep clients there longer. For example, I've got to have 10 clients that I see in my therapy practice at all times. I've got to keep 10 on my caseload, right? How easy and simple is it for me to find 10 people that are fairly easy clients? I can
right,
see every single week. I don't have to keep marketing myself. I don't got to find more. The longer you stay with me, the easier my job is actually.
truth.
Because if you guys dive out, I got to go find more people. I've got to start seeking out. I got to get some more referrals, all that stuff, because part of my contract says I need to have this many people. Who thinks
Well,
about that?
and if you don't think that hospital systems and
Mhm.
clinics, larger clinics, have
Yep.
stats like that, you're
Mhm.
mistaken.
You are very even private practices. You are
Mhm.
mistaken.
Right. So what I was saying is it's not just a private practice thing like, "Oh, I need to
Yep.
make an income for myself."
Yep. Yep.
It's even though
Mhm.
if you're a therapist that works in a clinic or hospital, whatever, that hospital has certain metrics they're looking at from you, productivity, you
Yeah.
know? So it is about getting people in, and that's so weird. So then
Mhm.
you think about, like, creating mental health crisis, right?
Mhm.
Like, when
Yeah.
this whole last 4 years happened, what was everybody talking about? The mental health crisis. Now, is it? Sure. Like, it
Yeah.
was, yeah, like, people were really scared and lots of stuff happening. There especially our kids, like, we did them dirty, but anyway, I if we keep perpetuating this idea that everybody is in a mental health crisis, then nobody will get
Mhm.
better,
Yes.
right? So, and then I have a constant flow of clientele, you
Mhm.
know, coming into my office, you know?
Yeah.
So, it's very interesting, but because we're running short on time, I did wanna bring in, obviously, psychiatric medications are iatrogenic. Um, I'm gonna say not for everybody because people are gonna come after me, but,
Mhm.
it is that idea that you can't get something for nothing, and I go back to the Harvard, medical school trained person who's gonna be on our podcast very soon, so I'm super excited
Yay.
about that. Yes, because 'cause we're gonna talk, and saying that we live in that reductionist society, meaning we want to reduce a symptom, but in order to reduce
Mhm.
a symptom, we create a whole host of other problems.
Yep.
That's iatrogenic,
Mhm.
So he's, saying that not just him, but research says that, psych meds or even any other medication, you can't get something for nothing. When we reduce a symptom here, you're probably going to experience a bunch of other things that you didn't want. And so it makes me think about, okay, so SSRIs, my experience with that was that I was extremely disconnected to my world. I was extremely disconnected to myself. I was bland. I had lack of memory. I was just existing in this neutral space. And in my example is because, like, I was prescribed when I wasn't depressed. So I was prescribed something, you know, to help make it that I wouldn't be depressed in the future, whatever. But this is a great example of something that caused me more harm than good, right?
Yeah.
So, it caused an extreme amount of harm for me and created mental health problems for me that did not exist before I took them. So that is iatrogenic. That is like
Yeah.
the prime example of
Mhm.
iatrogenic because I wasn't
Mhm.
depressed before or complaining about depression before I
Sure.
took the medication. But
Mhm.
afterwards, I would have qualified for that diagnosis for sure.
Oh,
Absolutely, 100%.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
that's
nobody would have looked at it as it was a medication issue.
Mhm.
Nobody, I swear to God, nobody would have said, "Do you think it's because you were on this medication and you weren't before?" Says nobody
Mhm.
ever, you
Mhm.
know?
It's a hard thing to talk about with people too, even with
Yeah,
clients when I bring that up, like, that is such a hard truth to wrap your brain around, and the idea that the thing that you put a lot of stock and trust and faith in, right, could actually be creating these other
problem.
symptoms, like medical and psychiatric symptoms that you're
Yeah,
struggling with now, but it's such a hard thing to wrap your brain around. I was there for years.
yep,
Until I finally let myself get curious about it.
right.
I was in it for years. And so I think that we will have there is going to be another episode that we're going to do specifically more on that and even on the idea of diagnoses and those labels.
Mhm.
And that the helplessness that's perpetuated with those or the things that you think you have that you didn't have. And that one is going to be a whole other one to talk about diagnostic wise.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is
Yeah.
one of those things as a consumer of therapy, as a consumer of medication, of psychiatry,
Mhm,
get really curious about what it is that you're doing. Is it creating more problems?
mhm.
Do you feel like you're progressing and getting better, or do you feel like this is making you worse? Again, medication is prime.
Yeah.
I think it's a prime example because we put so much stock in this idea that this pill, whoop, is going to change my life
Yep.
for the better.
Mhm.
And then we don't assess, we don't evaluate, we don't, it's just, this is the
And
way that it is.
I'm gonna go so far as to say that even in therapy, get curious about your therapy. Damn,
Mhm.
get curious about your therapist.
Right.
What are they involved in? Right? Like, I had somebody look something up about me, right? And was asking me about it because, everything's on the internet now. And I was very honest with them and I shared, yeah, actually, that is an endeavor that I was involved in the past. My name popped up in some stuff. And they were like, so you used to work in corrections, because it was a news media clip, right? Where I was
Mhm.
talking about evidence-based interventions for the state. Woo! Boy, that's full circle right there. And they
Right.
said something to me that I thought was fascinating. And they said, so it kind of means that your lens, even when you're doing treatment with me, you have a very interesting take on things, don't you? And I said, I do. And in fact, I said, if you ever catch me in a space where I'm going somewhere that doesn't make sense for you, or I'm asking you questions that seem to be too much like siloed into something that would make sense for that era of like from me, right? Tell me. Like, say it, because I don't ever want to put you in that position, right? So it's this idea of patients getting curious. Like, it is okay to get curious about the treatment interventions that your therapist is doing. It,
You know
it
what's
is
so
okay to
interesting?
do this.
Yeah,
Look this shit up. Like, you want to know everything about Dr. Terry? Oh,
oh,
she's all over the place. But
right.
seriously, though, you that matters. And people think I'm nuts when I say this.
No.
Like, you're telling your patients it's okay to look things up about you? Yeah.
Yes. Guess what?
Yes.
They're doing it anyway.
Look it all up and then
They're doing it anyway.
ask
Mhm.
me about my time in prison. Like, ask me
Right?
seriously, like, what does 15 years in a system like that, how does that shape the way
Right.
that you view therapy? What a
Right.
great damn question. And
Mhm.
that is part of informed consent. Here are the things that I may not be an expert in, or that I may have slightly a slant view on,
Mhm.
that, you know what, it's okay for you to ask me about and for you to know about. And then if you
Mhm.
see it, I want you to bring it up,
Mhm.
because something's not sitting right with you.
But I have to say, um, we live in this therapist, like, don't ask a question about a therapist outside of, the therapy session
Yes.
because, that's too personal and you
Mhm,
shouldn't know that. But I think on some levels you should. You should be allowed to ask those questions because they might
mhm.
make a difference for you.
Correct.
And I'll share the answer or not,
Yes.
depending, like,
Yes. It, it's it's
and
it's
so
it's
far I haven't in all these years, I haven't had an extremely intrusive
mm-mm.
question
I
that
haven't either.
of
Yeah.
course, I don't share my kids' names or birth dates or anything like that, like, but I'll talk about my kids,
Yeah.
like, that's important to me.
Mhm.
So that's a really interesting conversation, I think, and I as we are talking about this real quick, when I ask, clients questions, like, I'll ask them questions and I'll be getting really curious, and sometimes it comes out in 20 questions, right? Like
Yeah.
the whole 20 questions. But I'll get this glossed over look, and then I can tell they're sorting through, like, the multiple choices of this question, and I'll always say, "Just so you know, I don't know the answer to this question because I'm asking you what your answer is," and there's an automatically this, "Oh," like they're passing a quiz or something,
Mhm.
like, this is a
Mhm.
quiz and there's a right answer and a wrong answer, and I'm like
Mhm.
as soon as I see the churning, I'm like, "I'm gonna let you off the hook. There's no right answer here.
Mm-mm.
I'm
Mhm.
not looking for something in particular,"
Yeah.
but I think a lot of therapists look for something in particular, and they
Mhm.
go down that road, but again, that goes back to, like, what you say matters, and it's powerful, which is why it's important to get that out of your client, but
Yes.
anyway, that's a whole different conversation, but these conversations just kind of flow naturally one into the other,
I
but,
know. I
I
know
mean,
they do.
this word is iatrogenic,
Yeah.
and I think it is a word that we need to talk about more and more and more and more and more, and I had not heard of this, which means it was never involved in any of our ethics trainings, which it should be.
Mhm.
Like, duh, like,
Yeah.
these are
Yeah,
such
and I
dumb
think there's other
moments.
buzzwords that get put on it, right, when we're talking about ethical lines, right? When it comes to
Mhm.
diagnosing, when it comes to, treatment programming, right? When it comes to this whole idea of, transference,
Oh,
right, and
mhm.
counter transference, and what does that look like, right? Like,
Sure.
there's all those buzzwords. Those ones we've learned, but this one has a different level to it that,
Mhm.
it is actually
It's
even
extra
broader.
spicy.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and it's broader too, so it
Mhm.
covers, yeah, it's got the
Yes,
it's
but they're never
it's
gonna talk about it in terms of medication, just so you know, that's
yeah, and that's,
er
you know what? And that's okay, but we will.
yeah, leave that conversation to us. So, that is another episode of the Gaslet Truth podcast, right?
Yeah.
Make sure you like and follow us wherever and listen to us wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Yes.
You can find us there. You can find us on YouTube. And all the links to our socials will be in the show notes. So please
Yeah.
give us your comments. We love to hear from you. We love to know what you think of the episodes. And that's all. Get
Thanks,
curious.
everybody.